Hi everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar from SmashFly featuring Aptitude Research Partners and CDW. My name is Lauren Clare. I'm the Demand Generation Specialist here at SmashFly, and I'll be your host today. We're so excited that you've joined us for this awesome webinar. We have tons of great content coming up, but first I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. You have two options for connecting to the webinar audio today. You can either connect to the broadcast using your computer speakers, or you can connect via phone. The dial-in information is available in the WebEx panel under Quick Start. If you experience any technical difficulties with WebEx today, please contact WebEx support at 866-229-3239, and I'll be typing this phone number into the chat panel for your reference during the webinar. We're also going to be live tweeting during the webinar, and we want you to join in on the discussion. We encourage you to tweet about all the great content we're going to be sharing using the hashtag HRTech. Now I'd like to introduce you to our awesome speakers today. First, we have Madeline Laurano, Chief Research Officer and co-founder at Aptitude Research Partners. Madeline has been an industry analyst for over 12 years with a primary focus on the talent acquisition market. She has previously held research roles at Aberdeen, Burson by Deloitte, ERE Media, and Brandon Hall Group. She has co-authored Best Practices in Leading a Global Workforce and has been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, the Boston Globe, Yahoo News, and more. We also have Rick Rosario, Senior Manager of Talent Acquisition at CDW. Rick is an established leader in the talent acquisition industry with experience as both a consultant and practitioner. He is currently a Senior Talent Acquisition Leader at CDW, a leading provider of technology solutions for business and government, education, and healthcare. Specifically, he leads recruitment operations for CDW's sales organization of over 3,000 coworkers with approximately 900 hires annually. Rick has a proven track record for designing, deploying, and managing recruitment programs with high-performing teams. After the presentation, you'll have the chance to ask Madeline and Rick your most burning recruiting and talent acquisition questions. We encourage you to submit your questions throughout the webinar via the WebEx questions pane. And we'll also be sending both the recording of today's webinar and the slides via an email after the event. So without further ado, I will pass it off to our speakers to get started. Madeline?
Thank you so much, Lauren. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and a big thank you to SmashFly for hosting the webinar. I'm thrilled to be here presenting with you and to be presenting with Rick Rosario. We're going to share with you our vision and our experiences for what a modern talent acquisition technology stack and framework is. And this is going to be a very different type of webinar from that best practice webinar that you might be used to. Our goal for today's webinar is really to provide clarity around the talent acquisition technology landscape. This is a market that has become incredibly complex in a very short period of time, incredibly confusing and incredibly overwhelming. And again, just over the past few years, with thousands of new technology providers that are in the market, I'm sure many of you are overwhelmed and noticing that there's even new categories that seem to pop up every month. Very difficult to understand what technology you might need to be successful. So our wish for you and what we hope that you'll leave with today is a better understanding of the technology in the space and how it can support you in improving the way you attract, recruit, and onboard your talent. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, first we're going to talk about the current state of talent acquisition technology. We're going to look at the challenges and pressures that companies are facing. And we're going to talk about the evolution. So why there's this need to kind of pull talent acquisition out and address what a talent acquisition technology stack is and why we need to have a different conversation around talent acquisition technology. Next, we'll look at the talent acquisition framework. What exactly is included in the talent acquisition trifecta today? And then we'll talk about the experience and how there's this drive now. As many of you know, it's hard to be a talent acquisition professional without talking about the candidate experience, but also the recruiter experience and hiring manager experience and how that's powering into how successful we are in our talent acquisition function. And then we'll leave you with a couple key takeaways that hopefully will help you get started in your own organization. So talent acquisition is challenging. It's tough. It's a difficult job. We know this. You know this as talent acquisition professionals. And unfortunately, it seems to become more complex every year. There's a study that was done by McKinsey not too long ago, and they found that 40% of companies have had unfilled positions for 6 months or longer within their organization. So why has something that should be very basic, find the right people to fill jobs, become so incredibly complex? And what we're going to do is just talk quickly about some of the pressures that are facing talent acquisition functions today. The first one is the pressure to meet business goals. So talent acquisition used to be a back office function, and now it's become something that's more strategic. It's a business priority. And while this is a good thing, it's to be important to the business, it creates more pressure to align with business goals and make sure that you have a strategy that's broader than just something that would stay within recruitment. The next pressure is the increasing contingent workforce. I'm sure many of you are using contingent workers, thinking about using contingent workers, trying to understand how they fit into your workforce. We found that over 70% of companies are leveraging contingent workers, and that could include temporary workers, independent contractors, SOW-based projects. And contingent workers really provide a lot of benefits in having a flexible workforce, being able to kind of fill those talent gaps very quickly. But it's also challenging because typically procurement owns and manages contingent workforce. And we know that talent acquisition and HR manage their full-time employees. So how are you able to kind of bridge those gaps and make sure that you're thinking about talent acquisition in terms of your entire workforce? The next pressure is new technology. So it really amazes me with talent acquisition. It's an exciting space to cover as an analyst, but it must be so overwhelming for organizations. There are so many new technology companies that enter the market, new categories get created. Ray Tenenbaum, who is the CEO of a company called Great Hires, does a study on recruiting providers on the angel list. And he looked just from a short period last year, from August to September, 169 recruiting startups were on the angel list, and just for recruitment, and that's certainly the number seems to keep going up every month. And then the final pressure is transparency. So transparency is a reality for the world we live in, and it's a reality for talent acquisition. Social media gives us a new level of openness. We've got sites like Glassdoor, which provide information on the employer and what candidates would expect. So it's really important to think about how talent acquisition professionals can not only meet those business pressures, but also provide more transparency to candidates and people that they're engaging with. So Rick, I know that at CDW you face your own pressures with talent acquisition, and I don't know if any of these resonate with you or you have specific ones that you want to share.
No, most do. I mean, the challenges that you cite are very real for us at CDW. If I think about, you mentioned talent acquisition as being an enabler. CDW is a very growth-focused organization. So with those hiring or those growth goals, those translate into hiring goals and needs for us from a strategic workforce planning perspective. It puts a lot of stress and tax on our talent acquisition function to make sure that we're properly aligned with resources, that we're enabled with technology, and that we're structured with the proper business processes in a way to translate our hiring activity into growth for the organization. You mentioned flexible workforce, and on top of that, you have a multi-generational workforce, and that continues to become more complex as the years, I guess, day after day, as we continue to introduce the millennial generation into the workforce. But on top of that, you mentioned contingent labor, and there's been this growing connection, especially at CDW, where we're leveraging more and more our contractor population to address some of our full-time recruiting needs. And there's this holistic conversation that seems to evolve on a regular basis where leaders are trying to be more creative about filling our hiring gaps for critical talent by leveraging our contingent labor pool. So that's something that we see on a regular basis. And you'd mentioned technology and that it's overwhelming. I may be presenting with you today, but I think you can put me in the bucket of being overwhelmed with the amount of technology choices that are out there. I'm not a technology expert. I am a functional leader, which requires me to have knowledge of technology. And so my perspective today is going to be far more about how we leverage technology as an enabler to drive process and execute talent acquisition, but certainly there are a lot of choices out there, and they're becoming more critical as you decide to make decisions on leveraging technology. And then lastly, you talked about candidate experience. I mean, I couldn't agree more. We're in a review-driven society. There's an increased amount of pressure for us to offer a positive candidate experience with every touch point, and really we focus that with our hiring managers. Every engagement point with a potential candidate has to be positive, because to not do that, bad press can spread like wildfire in this line of work. And so we understand that, we recognize that, and we do our best to ensure that our hiring managers and our hiring processes are aligned to drive a strong candidate experience.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. And I think there's, overall there's just more accountability for talent acquisition professionals. Accountability to the business, accountability to candidates, accountability to be, knowledgeable about technology and knowledgeable about how the workforce is changing. It's a difficult job. So it's complex. It's a complex time for talent acquisition, but for HR tech, it's a very exciting time. HR technology is a $15 billion industry. This is research that was conducted by IDC. And you can see, and I think what's exciting for talent acquisition is that talent acquisition is such a huge part of that. More than learning, more than performance and compensation. Recruitment is a very large area for HR technology, and I think that just further supports the point that talent acquisition deserves its own suite. It deserves its own technology stack, and companies need clarity around what that huge market encompasses. Even if you look at investment, so it's not just the kind of traditional providers you might think of, but also investment in this space is incredibly high. You can see even in 2014, 1.9 billion just investment went into HR technology, and that continues, and it's surpassing even markets like marketing and finance.
And I talked to Madeline about this slide specifically, and we joked that I wish that my budget increased at the same scale that the market did between 2010 and today. But I think that just further kind of substantiates that the struggle is real, not only to select the right technology, but it's not like the money is being handed to us. The business case still needs to be established, and the infrastructure still needs to be there in order to put the technology to work, not just to get the dollars to purchase the technology.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's such an important point. It's thinking about what an organization needs to have in place for their processes and the structure before even thinking about what they need from a technology perspective. So talent acquisition, it's no surprise that the technology market is so hot right now and there's so much investment in the space, because when you think about what business leaders care about, they care about two things. They care about revenue and they care about talent. And when you think about revenue and growth, most organizations, especially at the enterprise level, are using platforms like Salesforce or some other CRM to manage their sales, manage their pipeline, and be able to drive business. And it's very straightforward. You know that Salesforce is your bread and butter. When you think about the talent side, it's not that straightforward. It's very complicated because there's so many different technology providers. There's so many different ways you're using technology and thinking about how you get people, onboard them, think about making sure that you're developing them and engaging them and retaining them. So it's very complicated when you think about what the two objectives are and the difference between revenue and talent. And Rick, I know you probably at CDW use a variety of different solutions, so I don't know if this resonates with you with how kind of complex it is just to manage all the different providers you might be using.
Yeah, the ones you reference here are more like core, core technologies, but on top of these core technologies, you've got a lot that supplement the talent acquisition process. So for instance, we're a Taleo user for our ATS, and we're a PeopleSoft user for our HRIS, but however, we have an assessment provider, so CEB provides an assessment for a portion of our hiring. We use HireView as our video interviewing platform. We have an Oracle compensation module. We have SmashFly that plugs into our ATS as a recruitment marketing platform. So it's not just to think about all the options that are part of your kind of core technology components, but I think we also have to make this, we have to become more educated about what integrations look like, because it's very likely that as your talent acquisition environment evolves, you're going to be pressed to leverage some supplementary technologies that will need to integrate with some of your core systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, integration and thinking about the ecosystem. And I think when we get to looking at the technology stack, that will become more clear. So talent acquisition's changed a lot. You know, I think that just kind of further supports the need for a talent acquisition suite and why we're even having this conversation today. It's not a conversation we would have had 5 years ago about what is included in a talent acquisition specific technology stack. And the evolution's been interesting. I mean, recruitment was very reactive, not even that long ago. When I remember first covering the market, it was kind of a back office function. It was something that, you had to fill positions as quickly and as cost effectively as possible, and that's what talent acquisition cared about. And then thinking about how companies were then using their ATS systems and their job boards, and that was the core to how companies functioned. You use the ATS for workflow, you use job boards to source talent, and that was pretty much it. And then you had other solutions to help support that. Then there was really this push for an integrated talent management suite. And I mentioned this earlier, and recruitment was a piece of that. It was a module within a fully integrated talent management suite where it was a piece of performance and compensation and succession planning. And what happened during that stage, and I think when we talked about this idea of talent management, is that there was a defocus on talent acquisition. Talent acquisition is different. There's a different buyer. There's different priorities. There's different technology to be used. And I think by kind of lumping it into just a talent management suite, we've defocused on how important and complex talent acquisition really is. And we're seeing the pendulum now swing back, and organizations are thinking about the need to have a fully integrated talent acquisition suite, to think about how to take this complexity and think about the solutions that you need to have in place and how those solutions integrate with each other. And that's why I think why we're seeing now this need and what we're calling a talent acquisition trifecta. It's 3 components. It's not just recruitment. It's not just thinking about filling positions. It's thinking about talent acquisition in 3 buckets. Attract, being able to attract, engage, and communicate with future candidates through a variety of different channels. Recruit, being able to identify and recruit, screen, select the best fit for your organization. And then hire and onboard. Make sure that you're hiring the best people, transitioning them into the company, and onboarding them as new hires. And it supports that trifecta, and that's what we're seeing for organizations. Those organizations that are most successful are those that are thinking about talent acquisition in these terms, thinking about the need to have a recruitment marketing platform to attract talent, the need to have an applicant tracking system to be able to recruit talent, and then an onboarding system to make sure that you're not only staying compliant when you're onboarding people, but also that you're providing that positive new hire experience. And again, I think this is very interesting and very different than how we were talking about talent acquisition even a few years ago. Even a few years ago, we were just looking at the applicant tracking system. That was considered the core of a recruiting function. But now all 3 of these buckets are so important. All 3 of these platforms are so important. A recruitment marketing platform, some people call it a pre-applicant platform. It's the solution at the front end that manages all of your outbound sourcing, your inbound recruitment marketing, and your employer branding. And it is a core part of talent acquisition. It's no longer something that some companies are using. We're seeing it on RFPs. We're seeing companies now structuring their talent acquisition functions in these different ways. And recruitment marketing is a big part of that. And there's lots of different capabilities that these platforms provide. It's not just a talent community. They're not just an employer branding solution. They're really able to support companies in making sure that they're improving the front end of the recruitment process. So ultimately, you get the great hires to fuel your growth. The applicant tracking system, that's the workflow. That's what allows you to send out requisitions, make sure that you're posting jobs, make sure you're screening, assessing candidates, making sure that you're kind of moving them through the process, extending an offer, and making sure that they get interviewed, and making sure that, eventually you're going to be able to onboard people. Making sure that with an onboarding system, you have the forms, management component in place, so you're staying compliant. You make sure that you're filling out the right new hire forms and doing it in a way that's very effective and efficient for your company. Making sure that all the tasks are in place. Your new hire has a computer if they need that computer on the first day. Making sure that they're able to meet with their managers or IT or whoever they may need to meet with. And then socializing them into the company culture. So again, this is a very different model, even from a few years ago, where a talent acquisition and recruitment technology would basically be your ATS. So Rick, I think this is similar to how you think about it at CDW.
Yes, it is. So our stack looks like what you've got up on the screen right now. So we use SmashFly as our recruitment marketing platform, and within that we have job ad distribution, we have the career marketing sites, as well as the CRM technology. So we have all three major modules there. We then use Taleo as our ATS, that's our system of record, and we pretty much at the point of application, all of our hiring workflows and screening workflows are driven from Taleo. And then for onboarding, we have we have a combination of Taleo and PeopleSoft that handle kind of the post-hire, what we would say all the kind of the post-hire activity to be. So right now, that's what our stack looks like. But I think one thing I want to call out here, and just kind of being real about the way that we're stacked, is that this sort of, I think I caution anyone who is ready to invest in technology to be very realistic about what you're trying to do. I mean, if you're just, if your business case is we're having a hard time finding talent, I'm gonna need some SmashFly. I think I would caution you against that. I would really think in terms of the business objective that you're trying to achieve. Understand how talent needs will address this business objective, and then make decisions about technology beyond that, because you're going to have to think about helping the business reach an objective, and you're going to have to think about how your talent acquisition function can support the pursuit of those business objectives. And your responsibility as a practitioner is going to be about how you execute processes around attracting talent and hiring talent and onboarding that talent. So it's more about the process and the rigor that you have in being consistent in going about attracting, hiring, and onboarding talent, and then purchasing and investing in technology that enables you to flawlessly execute those processes. So, as I get off my soapbox here and then hand back off to Madeline, that'd be a resounding bit of advice that I'd offer throughout the conversation today.
Yeah, it's such an important point, because I think companies are so quick to say, we've made this investment in the technology, and it should be able to, support us in finding the right people and recruiting the right people and then onboarding the right people. But it doesn't work that way. Companies really need to think about what their unique needs are, and make sure when you're selecting the provider that they're a partner through that. They understand how your process works, and they're going to partner with you through that. And you have some consistency. So the process and your objectives on the recruitment marketing platform side are, going to align and integrate with how you're thinking about, selecting and using your applicant tracking system, and then for onboarding as well. So, I think the recruitment marketing piece is interesting to me, because this is, again, when we think about the tech stack, this is the new component. I think we've had the ATS, onboarding's been around because, companies have either been using their ATS for onboarding or might use their HRIS for onboarding, and there's, certainly a market for those solutions. But companies are starting to really recognize that recruitment marketing and a recruitment marketing platform is a significant and important category within talent acquisition technology. And what's interesting to me, too, is when we ask in our research companies to identify the capabilities that are most critical when selecting a recruitment marketing platform, They said career sites, SEO, employee referrals, and talent communities. And this is just a few. A recruitment marketing platform can support so many different things for an organization, everything from job marketing to web sourcing, email marketing, and, companies really, I think, need to understand what these solutions can do and the full breadth of the capabilities that they offer. And Rick, I know we were talking a little bit and, kind of going back and forth about the talent communities, and you had, a great perspective, I think, about how they were, so important for companies. Now there's so much more we need.
Right. Yeah, I thought you can't, go through your LinkedIn feed without hitting up like 6 or 7 articles on talent communities. And so when I saw this breakdown of what your audience here thought was the most critical in recruitment marketing, to see career sites and employee referrals, those are things largely considered to be table stakes, right, in the recruitment and the talent acquisition function. But when you look at how much more enabling an organization can be by using technology just within their career site and driving more employee referrals, I feel like that's an interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the kind of last point I'd make on this too is that recruitment marketing and what a recruitment marketing platform can do is a lot of, everything that your ATS does not do. Your ATS cannot support the front end of engaging, communicating with, marketing to talent out there. And companies for so long have complained about their ATS systems, and, satisfaction rates are very low for an ATS. When you think about recruitment technology under these 3 buckets with the Trifecta, and you think about having that recruitment marketing platform, it elevates the satisfaction with the ATS as well. Now companies understand ATS does not do everything, and it can and it shouldn't. With the recruitment marketing platform that can handle everything on the front end, with the ATS that you need in place and can support your processes, and with the right onboarding system, you're able to really improve your talent acquisition function, improve the candidate experience, and overall have an easier time finding and recruiting and onboarding talent. Some of the challenges I think that companies face, thinking about when you make a selection, when you're implementing a solution, is the integration. I know, Rick, you've talked about that. The complexity, we've talked about how crowded this market has become. Data, certainly being able to have data throughout all of your systems and understand how to make insights and better decisions using that data. And then creating that consistency. So, making sure that, you have the right objectives and priorities across each of those platforms. And Rick, I don't know if kind of any of those in particular resonate with you and kind of the journey that you've been on with the different
all of them. Yeah. all of the above, I think. Yeah. When we started thinking about purchasing technology and then going on through integration, or implementation, I should say, all of these were addressed and a considerable amount of time was spent figuring out within our, just within our talent acquisition and HR function, but also, trying to determine how much of this should be exposed to our business leaders, so that they have stake in adopting this sort of technology and leveraging it as well.
Yeah. So I don't know if this looks familiar to anyone out there, but I feel like this is sort of how a lot of people view HR technology and specifically talent acquisition technology. It's very confusing and overwhelming and crowded. There's a million different categories, so many different providers, there's overlap. And I've even seen people put together models and different technology stacks for HR technology and talent acquisition technology, and it looks like this. It looks messy. And this is an example that a company did for a marketing technology stack. And what we want to do, and our hope today, is to simplify talent acquisition. We don't want you to think about the tools you need and the platforms you need in this way. We want you to think about it in a very simple way. three platforms support a talent acquisition trifecta and a holistic view of talent acquisition: your recruitment marketing platform, your ATS, and your onboarding system. And then there's an ecosystem of providers that you may need or you may not need, depending, again, to Rick's point, about your own internal strategy, your own internal processes that will support those platforms. Do you need additional sourcing tools? Are you, specific to a certain industry that you want to integrate with your recruitment marketing platform? Do you have a separate analytics solution that you want to use to make sure that you're integrating with? You probably have existing relationships with a background checking provider that you want to make sure is integrated with your ATS, or a pre-hire assessment provider that you want to make sure is integrated. Or you might be using a different type of forms management solution for onboarding. So it's thinking about the three platforms you need and then the ecosystem that can support it. The nice thing that I've noticed with a lot of the leading providers out there is that they are now offering either recommendations or partners or best practices around the ecosystem to make it less confusing, to make it less complex, to be able to say to their customers, these are the providers we trust in the ecosystem, and we hope you can trust them too. And it, takes you away from kind of looking at that messy landscape and saying, who do I need, what do I do, and where do I go? And Rick, I think you had a great point too, even about thinking about the ecosystem in terms of outputs from the platforms.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of goes back to what I was talking about before around ensuring that your technology is selected and implemented in a way to execute process. But I think you also need to think about while you're doing it, when you're implementing your technology, that you're thinking about the data that you're going to need so that your reporting can get you the analytics that you need. So, and I can tell you this, that our reporting, the building of our reporting inventory was kind of it was very fluid, we'll call it that. So, we started out with a specific set of reports, and as we evolved and gave the business data that they hadn't received before, and I'm sure many of you on the phone get this, as you share analytics with your business leaders, they used to not get, at least this was our story, they used to not get any data. So we were like, hey, you should be happy with some of the data that we're giving you, let alone that then all of a sudden the requests for data increase exponentially. So I think it's just about, having a thought process and a decision matrix around, I think it's first, ensuring that you have the right data elements in your process that are reportable so you can get data. Secondly, ensure that you have a solid decision-making mechanism for how you're going to create new reports or adjust existing reports so you can give the business the analytics that they need. And then understand which data is important just within your recruitment organization so that you understand how things are operating underneath the hood.
Yeah, a great point. And I think so often companies don't want to take the time to do that and think about not only what they need to look at, but how to, ensure that they're getting the information they need and the reports that they need.
Yep.
And I think
so
that,
this is what, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say this is, kind of, I think, a great way to kind of break down your model.
Yeah, so this is just CDW's, our mix in, or our landscape, basically, applied within our environment. So, we leverage SmashFly, as I mentioned before, as our recruitment marketing platform. There we're driving our broad level or broad stroke to reach large pools of potential sources of candidates, and we're sourcing prospects from here, and we're sending the message of CDW as an employer of choice to kind of a broad base of prospects. At that point, we're able to do either broad-based interest assessment or have be targeted about assessing interest, and then we're able to ask for consideration or ask for application within SmashFly as well. So at that point, assuming that we've talked to a prospect and engaged a prospect enough for them to opt in for a specific role, once they click on because we send out a talent form to give people an opportunity to provide some base level information about themselves, and they have an opportunity at that point to go onto our career site and enter our application environment for a specific role. And once they've done that, their information comes into our application environment, and then once they fill out the application, they're in Taleo. And once they've and they're in Taleo all the way through when they're hired. And at that point, then it's passed on to our HRIS system, which was PeopleSoft.
Yeah, which you use for onboarding. Great, and I think, thinking about clarifying the talent acquisition landscape, and I think Rick's model is a great one and, probably resonates with a lot of people on the call, is that, it's important because the talent acquisition, when you think about how, again, talent acquisition deserves its own suite, the market has become very complex. Talent acquisition professionals need to think about juggling all of these different hats. They need to think about networking and connecting with people and creating those pipelines, making sure that they're overachievers and meeting business objectives and understanding what those objectives are. Innovating, understanding how to push the envelope a little bit when necessary, using the right technology, making sure that the candidate experience is the right one, and then also understanding the data and analytics and how you can actually improve the overall, process and function. And thinking about kind of this new framework and thinking about talent acquisition technology stack, we found that there's really 4 different layers. And I think Rick's done a great job of, continuing to drive this message home, is that you need to have the right processes in place before you think about the technology. So we found 4 different layers under the 3 pillars of talent acquisition, the trifecta of talent acquisition. It's the people layer. What skills do you need under each of those different components? What processes are important for your organization? And every company is going to be a little bit different. So what's important for you to meet your business objectives, to improve the way that you're able to attract, recruit, and onboard talent? And then do you have the right partners in place? Do you have the right recruitment marketing platform, the right ATS for your company, the right onboarding system to be able to really improve those processes? And then what are you looking at for metrics? I think what I've noticed, and it's interesting from the metrics piece of it, is that for so long companies were kind of confused on the metrics component. Time to fill and cost per hire are important, and companies were then getting a message that they should just look at quality of hire. But there are so many metrics that are important, especially under the attract bucket, thinking about source of influence, thinking about conversion rates, that are a critical part to making sure that you are engaging with talent, attracting talent, getting the right people in through the process. And companies can't ignore them. And I think it's important to call out those metrics under each of those 3 buckets. And I know, Rick, we talked a little bit about metrics and how important they are to you at CDW.
Yeah, it's pretty much the entire the entire basis by which we operate. From when we have data from source of prospect all the way to post-hire. There are certain segments of the business where we're analyzing our performance based upon source or performance based upon previous employer. Really, for us, it's really become the linchpin of our entire operation.
Yeah, and so important. And I think that's probably changed a lot for companies. I think there's a lot of confusion around metrics in general, and what companies should be looking at, how they should be tracking them. And I think the systems can help support that and give you the right information that you need.
Agreed.
So how are companies performing? So we looked at the data that we had for companies that were just using ATS, not using a recruitment marketing platform and not using an onboarding system, and compared that with companies that are using all 3. And what we found is that companies that are using all 3, the full trifecta, were able to decrease turnover, decrease time to hire, and then improve the candidate experience. So a significant improvement and real business results when you think about how talent acquisition needs to be a more holistic process. And the candidate experience, and again, I think this is so important. It's hard to talk about talent acquisition without talking about the candidate experience, but it's, really a priority for companies, and we found it's the #1 priority. And I can tell you, having done this research and having asked this question, for the past decade, this was not the #1 priority. We just started to see this kind of come up even in the top 10 list a few years ago, and now it's #1, and it's #1, by a lot. So companies care about that. It's important. And what we found is that companies generally think they do pretty much okay with measuring the candidate experience, making sure they have a consistent experience, and believing that their experience has improved. Over 60% of companies pretty much think the candidate experience is going well for them. What's interesting is that when you compare this data with the data that the Talent Board conducts. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Candies or the Candidate Experience Awards, but it's awards that are given out to companies that have done an exceptional job with the candidate experience. And what they found is that candidates aren't quite that happy. Most of them feel, and you can kind of look at all of these data points, most of them feel, overall that they don't get enough feedback and they don't get enough communication. And that's through all 3 components of talent acquisition. Under a track, 55% of candidates have had a past relationship, and most candidates are doing their own research on jobs. When you think about recruitment, you think that companies, only 40% of recruiters are required to respond to candidates at all. And then onboarding, 53% of candidates said that less than 1 week elapsed before their last interview and extending the job offer. 16% of new hires were asked for feedback. That's very, very low. So I think the overall message is that how can you think about your priorities as a company, what processes you need in place, and then how the technology stack and each one of those different platforms can help you communicate with candidates, provide them the right feedback, and provide that positive experience. And thinking about the experience across all 3 components, some of our recommendations here are thinking about it early. Don't wait till the recruit component to think about the candidate experience. Certainly don't wait until you're interviewing them. There's so much that you can do as an organization, both in terms of your processes and the technology that you're using, to provide a positive candidate experience during the attract phase, during the recruitment marketing phase. Provide a consistent candidate experience. And Rick, I think you had a great point here about consistency, that companies need to be careful, when thinking about this, and I think it's worth calling out.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I saw the bullet, provide a consistent candidate experience, and I think you can almost interchangeably use the word consistent and strong candidate experience, because what we have found in our philosophy at CDW was to leverage some differentiation in the way that we engaged our prospects and engaged our applicants. So, we leverage some different workflows, and thankfully for us, we were able to work with SmashFly, and there's a decent amount of customization options where we can customize our workflow. So when we engage with a lead that expresses interest in CDW pre-apply, we can have some differentiated communication and differentiated workflow based upon whether we found someone at a career fair, if we leveraged a marketing campaign within our CRM to get them to express interest, or a lead that we sourced on a job board. But I think the overall point that I'm trying to make here is that to consider differentiated and customized approaches, and ensure that you're evaluating any sort of technology on the front end, that they can actually provide that to you. Just for some perspective here, I believe right now we probably have, I think it's 25 or 26 different workflows that we leverage in the way that we engage leads that express interest in CDW. So that's differentiated communications, differentiated emails, that's routing them to receive different forms for them to, maybe fill out a job alert, but based upon how we find a lead or how a lead finds us, it is unique. We communicate to them in a unique way based upon how we initially engaged with them.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. It's making sure that there's consistency, especially across the trifecta, but that there's differentiation and there's a personal approach, a unique approach, depending on different candidate groups. And then I think it's important to also look for capabilities to communicate with candidates. And again, in thinking about the technology that you're using, making sure that you have those capabilities, that it's, easy to send an email to candidates to provide status on where they're at, to be able to engage with them, provide them content about the company, and making sure that communication is part of the platform that you're using. And collecting feedback from candidates often. And so few companies do that. I mean, even if you look at the onboarding, 16% of companies are getting any feedback from their new hires. How was this? It's important, and it's not only important for your pre-hire efforts. It's important when you think about developing your employees on the post-hire side as well. When you think about engaging with them, think about retaining them. And then, providing a simple and consumer-like experience. I think that's what candidates expect. We have, certainly are seeing more sophisticated, savvier candidates. They're doing their own research. 76% of candidates do their own research on the job. And they expect to have the same experience that they have as consumers. And many of them are your consumers, so it's important. And then connect candidates to individuals within the company. And I think that's important across all three as well. It can feel lonely. It can feel scary to apply for jobs, to engage with companies, to get onboarded. And making sure that you're, whether it's through employee referral solutions on your recruitment marketing platform, whether it's thinking about, connecting candidates with people within the organization, through the ATS, or once they're new hires, making sure that they have a buddy system or, a team building exercise with people that they might feel familiar with. And then measuring the experience to make it better. And this is something you can do, and I think there's a lot of misperceptions that the candidate experience can and shouldn't be measured, but it's certainly not the case. It's important to, check in often and make sure that you're measuring that. And again, through all three of those stages. And then I think we'll just leave you with a couple of key takeaways today. The first is that the demand for recruitment technology has never been greater. It's, an exciting time for recruitment technology. There's a lot of different options. Companies need support. And I think, what we'd add here is Rick's point, is that you also have to make sure your processes are in place. You have the right processes and strategies to be able to support what that technology can do for your company. The talent acquisition technology stack and landscape is composed of three major systems: your recruitment marketing platform, your applicant tracking system, and your onboarding system. And companies that use all three, as you could see from the data that we found, are able to really improve efficiencies and create a better experience. And then the future of talent acquisition technology is going to come from those solutions that provide a better user experience, help solve business challenges, and create, that consistency. And I think that kind of goes back to the pressures that we talked about at the very beginning of this call. What are you facing? What challenges do you have? And how can technology help to support that? So, Rick, I don't know if there's anything you'd add there, or, if you feel this was kind of a good summary.
No, I think, I think you've covered it quite well.
Great. So at this time, I will hand it back to Lauren, because I think we have a couple questions.
Thank you both for a great presentation. Now we're going to move on to the Q&A. We have a lot of great questions coming in. Just a reminder to everyone that's listening in, if you have any questions for Madeline and Rick, you can submit them in the Q&A section of your WebEx pane. So one question that we received is, would you consider retention to be a valuable component of the trifecta?
Retention is certainly incredibly valuable, and I think retention can help with companies certainly making better decisions about who they hire. But we see, and I can tell you from the research we do at Aptitude, retention is part of the post-hire. So kind of what we are covering today for talent acquisition is the pre-hire for candidates before they become employees. So it's thinking about, how to attract them, and then thinking about recruiting them and then onboarding them. And certainly once they're onboarded, and a key metric for onboarding is certainly new hire retention. It's certainly, incredibly important.
Great. Another question that we got was, how do you recommend getting hiring managers more involved in the onboarding process?
That's a great question. And I can kind of add my 2 cents, and then Rick, I'm sure you have some examples or best practices that you would share. So to get on hiring managers involved with onboarding, I think it's important for the socialization component. So the way we kind of categorized onboarding at the beginning of the call was, the forms piece, making sure you're compliant, making sure that you have the right workflow and the tasks in place so everyone has a computer and they're meeting with the right people. And then there's a socialization component that's really important because that speaks to engagement, that speaks to retention and productivity. So making sure that new hires are involved with any type of team building exercises, making sure, some companies will do new hire happy hours. Some companies will, take your new hire out to lunch, provide information on the company culture to your new hires. But making sure that your hiring managers are the ones that are driving and involved with that socialization piece is really important.
Yeah, I think you hit on it. I mean, from a technology perspective, I think it's important to leverage workflows that have the hiring managers themselves executing the tasks. And, I do understand that there's going to be different dynamics for different companies, but I do think that the more that you can get your hiring manager engaged in the actual activity of onboarding someone, just from even just a task execution perspective, I believe that kind of gets them more bought into the whole, the entire onboarding experience as a whole. From an organizational perspective, you touched on some really good things too. I mean, I think it's important for them to do some of the softer things like, have specific activities for initially driving engagement and integration into the team. And so, to what degree talent acquisition is engaged with that, I think that's, organization by organization. Our teams at CDW are, their focus on engagement is really doing follow-up, onboarding is doing follow-up with their new hires for a period of up to, I believe it's 6 months that we check in with our new hires for our high volume recruiting inside sales organization, and they check in to see what their engagement's been, what their new hire experience has been like, and we provide that feedback loop back to the business.
Great. Another question that we got, I think this is more for you, Madeline, on the Aptitude research side. Someone asked, where did these stats come from that are in the slides?
So most of the stats are from our research at Aptitude Research Partners. The only one that isn't, and I can kind of go back to the slide, is this slide, if everyone can see it. And this is conducted by the Talent Board. And the Talent Board, runs the Candidate Experience Awards, and so they survey, hundreds of thousands of candidates and get their impression on the experience. The other one, too, I'll mention is in the beginning, looking at the market sizing. That was conducted by IDC, an analyst firm that looked at the spend of the $15 billion HR technology market, and then CV Insights, which does research on investment into different areas of technology.
Great, thanks. Another question that we got is, what's the most valuable metric you've seen in using a trifecta like this?
Well, for CDW, I can tell you that probably what gave us the most lift was, and it doesn't even sound all that sexy, but being able to quantify your sourcing effort. So, historically, you would just, without having a pre-applicant piece of technology, you didn't know how many, well, you would have to manually track how many sourcing type emails or prospecting emails you would send out, or really prospecting touches you would have, generally speaking, to get an applicant. And back in the day, your funnel used to just start at those who applied. Leveraging a front-end application like a CRM, or specifically for us, the SmashFly Recruitment Marketing platform, that gave us visibility to understand how much pre-applicant activity it took. So in other words, how many candidates did we have to source in order to get an applicant, which then kind of completed the entire activity funnel for for recruiting.
Great, thanks, Rick. Another question that we got is, what's the biggest gain you've experienced as a result of leveraging this sort of HR technology stack?
Man, I feel like if I could use my previous answer for this one, I would absolutely do that. Being able to understand how much sourcing activity was required to get an applicant, it was extremely important to us because, the majority of, well, a large portion of my budget is invested in advertising. So once I understood how much return I needed to get on my advertising, that just made me that much more confident and smart in making decisions about how I would invest, where would I invest, and what the cadence of investment looked like for advertising throughout the course of the year.
Great. Another question we have is, looking back on how you have your technology stacked, what was your biggest lesson learned during the purchasing process?
So this one might be for me again, Madeline. That's all right. Lesson learned was, and you probably were catching this vibe throughout the discussion, was do not underestimate the importance of implementation and process. Invest the time in knowing what you want the technology to do, and then spend and invest the time in enabling the technology to execute your process. Don't just expect to purchase the technology and expect it to fix your issues.
Okay. Another question that we got is, in terms of the emergent, how are you seeing the adoption of this? Are people able to really get into the forefront of adopting this?
Yeah, I mean, I think one way is understanding it. I think there's still, we're certainly seeing recruitment marketing, for example, as a recognized category, but I think there's still misperceptions about what it is and what's included in a platform and how you would use it and how it would integrate with the rest of it. And I think there, to continue to provide clarity there about what exactly it is, what your ATS can do, what expectations you should have from your systems. And then I think the other piece is the ecosystem, kind of recognizing that it's an ecosystem, that, it doesn't need to take over and overwhelm you. You have 3 systems that can support this, and then you can figure out, the other technology that you need to be able to, complement those systems and, enhance them.
Great, thanks. One more question that just came in. This will be the last one for the day, but if anyone else still has questions afterwards, feel free to reach out and we'd be more than happy to answer your questions. So this one says, do you have all of your applicants enter through your recruitment marketing module first, or can they apply directly via your ATS?
So this is Rick. I have we're set up with a two-way feed. So anyone who applies directly to a role, their profile is mirrored and dumped into SmashFly or into our CRM. And then we have those that simply express interest through one of our different campaigning mechanisms, and their expression of interest creates a profile for them in SmashFly, and then they're obviously not put into our ATS until they elect to apply to a role. And then on top of that, one thing that we did that was pretty cool for anyone who's kind of interested in the tech, we have that two-way feed allows us to pass step and status updates back and forth to the system. So if someone is interviewing in Taleo, there's a feed that passes information back to the CRM tool so that the CRM can see that someone's being interviewed, so that if recruiter A is if recruiter A is working with a candidate that's being interviewed and recruiter B sees that same candidate as they're sourcing in the CRM, they can see via their step and status that they're hands off because of the current that they're being interviewed in the process.
Great, thanks, Rick. I'd like to thank Rick and Madeline again for speaking today. This was an awesome discussion, and I'd like to thank everybody that joined us to listen in. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and we will be sending the recording and the slides in a follow-up email to everyone that registered. So thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.